Nobody standing on the platform that morning expected the wrong woman to step off that train, least of all the man waiting for her with flowers already wilting in his fist. Cedar Bend, Wyoming Territory, spring of 1881. The sky was the pale blue of early morning, the kind that still remembers the night's cold. Silas Whitmore stood near the edge of the platform in his one good coat, a handful of wild prairie roses going soft in his grip. He had cut them himself before sunrise, walking the fence line with a lantern because he could not sleep, thinking that a woman traveling all the way from Philadelphia deserved something better than an empty hand when she arrived. He had said her name to himself the whole ride into town, over and over, until it stopped sounding foreign. Eleanor Vance. A name he had written 100 times in letters and never once said out loud to her face. The train came in low and loud, throwing steam across the boards, and Silas watched every window the way a man watches weather rolling in off the plains, trying to read what was coming before it arrived. A woman stepped down from the second car. She was not dressed like anyone's bride. She wore a canvas riding skirt, split for the saddle and pale with wear at the knees. A man's coat hung loose on her shoulders, sleeves rolled twice to free her hands. A coiled rope hung from her travel bag the way another woman might carry a parasol, and her boots carried the kind of dust that only comes from real miles, not a Sunday walk to church. She looked like someone who had spent more hours on a horse than off one. Silas stepped toward her anyway. Hope has a way of doing a man's thinking for him. "Miss Vance." The woman lifted one hand, sharp and sure, the same motion she might use to stop a calf from bolting through an open gate. Silas stopped where he stood. "You bought the wrong bride, mister," she said. 5 words, plain as a slammed door, and half of Cedar Bend seemed to hear them at once. Old Ezra Tull looked up from loading the mail sack. 2 boys stopped chasing each other along the fence rail. Silas Whitmore stood there holding flowers for a woman who, by the sound of it, no longer existed. And then he did the one thing nobody on that platform expected. He smiled. He lowered the roses and held out his hand to shake instead. "Then I'm glad to meet whoever you are," he said, "because a person doesn't ride this far just to deliver bad news to a stranger's face unless they've got some decency in them. That's not a small thing where I come from." Her name was Nora Blackwood, and she had not traveled north to marry anyone. 3 days earlier she had been minding her own business entirely, which was cattle, not correspondence. 26 years old, raised in the brush country of Texas, she had spent 6 years driving stock for her father's outfit, and she was better with a rope than with small talk, a fact that suited her fine. That week she had 40 head bound for a buyer outside Cedar Bend, and she had been riding 2 cars up from the woman now missing from this platform, thinking about feed costs, not romance. Eleanor Vance had been thinking of nothing but romance, and all of it had gone sour somewhere around Omaha. She had answered Silas Whitmore's notice in a Philadelphia newspaper 8 months before, charmed by talk of open sky and good grazing that she had pictured mistakenly as something closer to a garden. She had written him faithfully through the winter. She had packed a trunk full of dresses built for parlors, not prairies. And somewhere past Omaha, watching the trees give way to flat land stretching farther than her eye could hold, she had understood all at once that she had made a mistake too large to undo by simply stepping off a train. So she had not stepped off. She had sat frozen in her seat while the conductor pleaded, and when the train finally slowed into Cedar Bend, she had reached for the nearest capable-looking stranger in the car, which happened to be Nora Blackwood coming back from checking her stock, and begged her, with real tears, to carry a folded letter out to whoever was waiting. Because Eleanor could not bear to watch a man's face break in front of her. Nora had no reason on earth to say yes. She had cattle to sell, and a train to catch, and no acquaintance whatsoever with the disappointed rancher of Cedar Bend. She said yes anyway, for a reason she could not fully explain to herself later, beyond the plain fact that somebody had to, and the somebody standing nearest happened to be her. She had meant to hand him the letter and be gone inside 2 minutes. That is not, in the end, how those 2 minutes went. "There's a letter," Nora said. Once his hand had come back down from the shake neither of them had quite let go of first. She held it out. "She asked me to bring you this instead of saying it herself. I read some of it on the ride over, if you'd rather hear it plain than dressed up in her words." "Plain, then," Silas said, and something in his voice had gone very quiet. Nora studied him a moment, the flowers still hanging useless at his side, and understood that whatever she said next was going to matter more than she had planned for. Because the truth she was about to hand him was only half of what this platform was going to cost him. The other half hadn't found her yet, either. "Plain, then," Silas said again, quieter this time, as if steadying himself for a blow he'd already half expected. "She's not coming," Nora said. She rode far enough to see what this country really looks like, and it wasn't the picture she'd built in her head. "She's sorry. I believe she means it. She's not a bad woman, just the wrong woman for this ground, and she found that out about 400 miles too late to say so kindly. So she asked a stranger to say it for her instead." Silas looked down at the folded letter in his hand for a long moment without opening it. Something moved across his face that wasn't quite grief and wasn't quite relief, but sat somewhere honest between the two. "I'm obliged to you," he said finally. "Hauling your own cattle and somebody else's heartbreak in the same week seems a poor trade for you." "Wasn't much of a trade," Nora said. "Wasn't going to let a man stand on a platform with flowers and find out the hard way besides. Some things a person ought to hear from a person, even if it's the wrong person doing the telling." She turned to go. She had a buyer waiting and 40 head eating away her profit by the hour in the stock pens, and this errand, kindly done, was finished. Silas said the thing that kept her standing there longer than either of them planned. "Miss Blackwood, before you go, I don't suppose you'd know of a rancher hereabouts needing an extra hand for a month. Seems I've landed in a good deal more trouble than a missing bride, and it happens to be exactly the kind of trouble a person who rides better than she talks might be useful for." Nora looked at him properly for the first time, past the flowers and the coat, and the plain disappointment settling into his shoulders. Something in the shape of his question caught her the way a strange brand catches a cattlewoman's eye at 50 paces. "A month for what?" "For keeping a ranch that stops being mine unless I'm married by my 30th birthday," Silas said, "which is the 4th of June, 28 days from this morning." The trouble, once he laid it out over coffee at the Cedar Bend house, had nothing to do with romance at all. It was paper, and paper is often the meaner enemy of the two. His father, Silas Whitmore, had built Broken Spur out of 9,000 acres and 30 years of stubborn will, and had died that past winter leaving behind a will that read, by every lawyer's account, like the work of a proud man determined to keep a grip on his son from the grave. The ranch would pass whole to Silas, the will said, provided he was a married man keeping a household by his 30th birthday. Failing that, it would split evenly with his cousin, Roscoe Whitmore, a man who had never mended a fence in his life, but had spent the past half-year in quiet correspondence with a coal survey agent working the territory. "My father thought a wife would settle me down," Silas said. "Truth is, I think he was afraid of exactly this. Roscoe means to sell the day the clock runs out. Once outside money owns half of anything, the whole of it follows inside a couple years. I've watched it happen to 2 ranches already in this county. I don't aim to make it 3. "So you advertised for a wife," Nora said, "same as ordering seed out of a catalog." "I'm not proud of the method," Silas admitted. "I am 28 days from losing the only thing my father ever built, and pride's turned into a luxury I can't much afford this spring. Nora sat with her coffee going cold and turned the whole thing over in her mind the way she'd turn over a horse before buying, checking the legs and the teeth and the temper all at once. You're asking a stranger you met an hour ago to marry you. I'm asking a stranger I met an hour ago to help me keep a ranch, Silas said. How that gets arranged, on paper or otherwise, is a conversation for later, and only if you're willing to have it at all. I've been engaged to a woman I never once met for 8 months, and it came to nothing. I'd rather spend these last weeks working beside someone honest than waiting on someone who's already told me, through a stranger and a folded letter, she doesn't want the life. It was, Nora thought, possibly the strangest proposal ever delivered over lukewarm hotel coffee, and also, uncomfortably, one of the more honest conversations she'd had with a man in some years. I've got a buyer waiting on 40 head, she said. I can spare 2 days settling that. After that, my father's outfit expects me home, not married off to a Wyoming rancher on my way back from selling cattle. 2 days is a start, Silas said. I've learned to work fast this spring. If a story like this one has already got its hooks in you, stay a while longer, because the harder truth hasn't even ridden into town yet. Broken Spur surprised her. She had pictured something threadbare, a ranch to match a man reduced to mail-order matrimony, but the house stood sound, the fences ran tight, and the herd grazed fat on new spring grass. The 4 hands, all men who'd ridden for Silas Whitmore a decade or better, watched her arrival with the wary courtesy of men waiting to see if a stranger could work before they bothered liking her. She answered that question by sundown, roping a foundered steer out of a bog on the second throw and setting its leg cleaner than the foreman himself could have managed. By supper, the careful edge had gone out of the way they said ma'am to her. Silas watched all of it with a look Nora caught twice and couldn't quite name. Not surprise exactly. Something closer to recognition. The way a man looks at a tune he can't place but knows, somewhere, he's heard before. 2 days stretched, honestly and without much ceremony on either side, into a week. There was real work at Broken Spur, and Nora found herself doing all of it, culling calves, riding fence at dawn, keeping the account books straighter than they'd been kept in years. The arrangement stopped feeling like charity somewhere around day 5, and started feeling like something neither of them had quite found the word for yet. In the evenings they sat on the porch steps with the lawyer's letters spread between them, working through the will's exact wording like 2 people solving a hard sum, not 2 people falling into anything. That was probably the safest way for it to happen, Nora told herself, if it was happening at all. Roscoe Whitmore rode out on the 9th day to see for himself what his cousin was up to, and he didn't bother hiding his displeasure at finding a capable stranger running cattle instead of a heartbroken bachelor running out the clock. Word in town says your bride never showed, Roscoe said, not troubling himself to dismount, looking Nora over the way a man looks over a horse he means to disqualify on a technicality, and that whoever this is got picked up off a stock train for the occasion. A judge is going to want proof this marriage is a real one, cousin, not paper dressed up to beat a deadline. I intend to see that he asks. Ask away, Nora said, before Silas could answer, in a voice that had settled 40 head of spooked cattle onto a railcar without ever needing to rise. I've branded more of this outfit's calves in 9 days than you've branded in your whole life, Mr. Whitmore. Go on and tell your judge a woman who can rope, doctor a steer, and keep an honest ledger isn't a real wife on account of which train car she rode in on. I expect he'll have his own opinion about which one of us understands what a ranch marriage is. Roscoe had no ready answer for that, and he rode off considerably less sure of his coal money than he'd arrived. Silas watched the dust settle a long moment. You didn't have to fight that one, he said. It's mine to carry. "It's ours to carry," Nora said, and then heard what she'd said and didn't take it back. It was the first time either of them had said the word out loud, and neither made a show of it, though both noticed. A letter caught up to her on the 12th day, forwarded on from the buyer's office in town, and it wasn't the kind of letter that made staying any simpler. It was from her father, Amos Blackwood. He was glad the cattle had sold fair. He mentioned, in the same unhurried hand he used for branding schedules and bad news alike, that Garrett Sloane had come by the house twice that month asking after her, and that Garrett ran a sound outfit 2 counties south, and that a man who asked after a woman twice in 1 month while she sat 400 miles from home was a man worth a serious answer, one way or the other. Her father didn't tell her what to do. He never had. He laid the facts on the table the way he laid a saddle out before a long ride, and left her to decide what she meant to ride into. Nora read it twice on the porch steps, then a third time, and Silas, coming out to check the evening stock, saw her face and had the good sense not to ask. She wrote her father back that night by lantern light, and tore up 2 drafts before she let the third one stand. She told him the truth, because lying to Amos Blackwood had never once worked in 26 years, and she saw no reason to start now. She told him about the wrong bride and the 28 days, and a rancher who'd offered her honest work instead of a honeyed promise, and a ranch that felt, God help her, more like something worth staying for with every morning that passed. "You always said a person ought to choose the harder true thing over the easier maybe," she wrote near the bottom. "I don't know yet if this is the true thing. I know it isn't the easy one, and for once that isn't scaring me off it." Roscoe didn't ride out again after that. He went to the county seat instead, which was worse. He filed a petition in Millbrook before a circuit judge brought in special, a man named Thaddeus Kane, asking that any marriage completed in the final days before the deadline be examined for what his filing called, in careful lawyer's language, want of genuine intent. He had witnesses lined up, the station master, who'd swear the expected bride never left her seat, the hotel clerk, who'd swear a different woman entirely had signed the register that same afternoon. It was not an unreasonable petition, dressed up as it was in reasonable words, and that was exactly what made it dangerous. "He's not wrong about the facts," Silas said, reading the filing at the kitchen table with a grimness Nora hadn't seen on him before. "He's just wrong about what they mean. A judge who's never met either of us is going to read this and see a panicked rancher and a woman paid off a passing train. Then we'd better give him something realer to look at than a filing full of facts arranged sideways," Nora said. She didn't say, because she hadn't fully admitted it to herself yet, that the facts had stopped feeling arranged at all somewhere around the 9th day and started feeling simply true. 9 nights before the hearing, she sat mending a torn glove by lantern light on the porch, and ran a needle through the leather in a small, quick pattern she'd sewn 1,000 times without once thinking about it. A line of tiny stitches shaped, if a person looked close, like a row of quail tracks in fresh snow. Across the porch, Silas Whitmore went very still. "Where did you learn that stitch?" he said, in a voice that had changed register entirely. "If this is the kind of story that makes you lean a little closer to the fire, stay with it, because what he's about to ask her next is the whole reason this story exists." "My mother's," Nora said, not looking up from the glove. "She sewed that pattern into everything, saddle blankets, coats, my brother's shirts when they tore at the elbow. Said a plain patch was an insult to good leather." She glanced up then, caught the look on his face and stopped. "Silas, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong," he said slowly. "I think something might finally be right and I don't quite trust it yet." He set the lawyer's papers aside. "Winter of '78, the Bitter Creek Drive north past the Forks. Worst storm anybody on that outfit had ever ridden through. Does any of that mean a thing to you?" Nora's hands went still on the needle. The whole shape of her attention changed. "There was a rider," she said quietly, "thrown from his horse, half frozen, alone in a drift I nearly missed in the white. I never got his name. Didn't have time to ask it, and didn't much think I'd live to need it. I gave him my coat, the old canvas one, my mother's stitching on the shoulder, and walked him to a line shack before first light, because I had 800 heads scattered clean across 2 counties and no time to spare for introductions." She looked at him properly now, searching, adding 3 years backward onto his face the way a person ages a photograph in their mind. "That coat had quail tracks stitched into the shoulder," Silas said. "I still have it, folded in a trunk in the house this very minute. I never could bring myself to give it away." He almost laughed, and it came out closer to something else entirely. "You saved my life and never gave me your name," he said. "3 years later you stepped off a train, and the first thing you told me was that I'd bought the wrong bride. Nora Blackwood, I don't believe you've ever once in your life been the wrong anything." The hearing in Millbrook lasted 11 minutes, which was 11 minutes longer than it needed to run, because Judge Thaddeus Kane, a plain and famously unsentimental man, found himself moved despite every intention otherwise. Roscoe's lawyer laid out the timeline exactly as filed. A missing bride, a stranger off a stock train, a convenient marriage assembled inside a deadline. It was a tidy story, and it came apart the moment Silas Whitmore stood up, uninvited, and told the court about a blizzard 3 winters gone and a coat with a mother's stitching folded away in a trunk, and asked the judge plainly whether a marriage built on a debt that old, and a rescue that had asked for nothing in return, sounded to him like fraud, or sounded like the truest thing either party in that room had ever done. Judge Kane asked Nora Blackwood one question only. Did she love this man, separate from any ranch, any deadline, any cousin's ambition? "I loved the shape of him before I ever learned his name," Nora said. "The ranch is just where I finally caught up to it." The petition was dismissed before noon. Roscoe Whitmore left the Millbrook courthouse considerably poorer in prospects than he'd arrived, and sold his much-reduced claim to a coal syndicate 2 years later for a fraction of what the survey agent had once promised him, which, folks around Cedar Bend agreed, was about the arithmetic he'd earned. They married on the morning of the 4th of June, Silas's 30th birthday, in the yard at Broken Spur with the 4 hands standing witness, and a circuit preacher who asked no questions he didn't already know good answers to. Nora wore her own canvas riding skirt, mended at the knee in a small pattern of quail tracks, because a woman does not stop being the one who pulled her groom out of a blizzard just because the wedding finally caught up to the rescue. The old coat still hangs by the door at Broken Spur, mended shoulder and all. Neither of them has ever found a reason to put it away. As for Eleanor Vance, she wrote once more that autumn, a short letter with no apology left in it, only good wishes and a quiet relief that seemed, by the tone of it, entirely genuine. She had found a schoolhouse position back east that suited her far better than any ranch ever could have, and married the town's young doctor the following spring. Everyone who heard the story agreed that the ground had simply sorted each of them onto the right side of it, in the end. Some folks in Cedar Bend still tell it as the story of the bride who never came. Nora Blackwood always corrects them, gently, when she hears it told that way. "It isn't a story about who didn't come," she says. "It's a story about who did 3 years too early to know it, and just in time anyway." If a story like this one has stayed with you a while, tell me down in the comments. Do you believe some people find each other twice before they ever learn each other's names? And if you want more of these long rides told slow and told true, stay close to the fire. There's always another one waiting just past the next bend in the trail.